Welcome to another episode of Energy Bytes. I'm Bobby Nealon. I've got the Rad Dad, John Calfan here, wearing the fucking Catalina wine mixer hat.
So effing Catalina wine mixer, baby.
Yeah. And really excited to have, we got Cameron Amigo here at Maritime Data Guru, currently at Orbit MI. And Cam and I went to Kings Point Merchant Marine Academy together, played some football, and I've done a little work for him. So really excited to have him on. And I've seen Jordan. We got Jordan Taylor with us. He's the technical advisor at Shipping Intel. But I've seen a lot of your stuff, and really excited to get to actually talk to you about it for once. So, welcome on, guys.
Thanks. Great to be on.
Yeah. So, and again, you guys, we'll get into it, but you're pretty heavy in the I think the LLM, AP, GPT type space. But I think it was last week or so. I think Meta open source their what did you say, John? Llama 3.1 was it?
3.1 405B is the
you would know that
the main one. It's pretty damn good, man. If it's good, I'll remember it.
Yeah, but I think just the fact that they open sourced it was kind of was a big deal, and I think kind of ironic that OpenAI was not the company that first open sourced a GPT type model. So curious. Your guys' thoughts on that, or just even just some of your experience with Llama or some of these other models that are out there.
I've got a more targeted question. What are your thoughts on open source performance versus the closed source performance? Because that was the big thing with Llama 3.1 is that it was basically right under GPT 4.0 or 4.0 mini or whichever one it was, but it's apparently the most performant open source model out there to date. That's as close to the closed source ones as we can get. So I'm very curious on y'all's thoughts.
So what we're working on now, at least we're using the OpenAI model currently for our proof of concepts. The way that we're working with the models currently is providing guardrails and, in addition to that, React and RAG methodology to these models. What we're kind of like, not to get into the weeds currently, but we are delving into how to measure the efficacy of these models in the context of the maritime domain. So we're Cameron and I are maritime people. Our background is robustly maritime. I sailed on tankers for ExxonMobil early in my career, transition operations, technical management after that. And when I look at these models and work with them, I'm looking for the types of outcomes that I might see in the domain that I work in, like the type of vocabulary, the type of responses that we get. And currently we're at the point now where we're feeding individual silos. We're making our own vector databases full of technical corpora that we use to feed these React and RAG generators, and then sort of how to measure the efficacy of these silos. So sorry, I don't mean to get into technical details of what we're doing. That's sort of where we're at. And I think a large part of the community is where we're at as well. So basically just creating guardrails onto these models so that we can use them for domain-specific tasks.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. At DW, we're using the OpenAI API, just like most everybody is for their initial stuff, but then it's like, oh, hey, I wonder, like I can spin up this Llama model through Ollama on my laptop or potentially even a Raspberry Pi. And so like once we get into bigger, fuller scale production or more users or more traffic, what does that look like if I can spin that up on my own instance and just deploy a Llama 3 model and use it instead of GPT, for example, for the generation part of my RAG. And so I think it's going to be interesting. I haven't tested the cost or anything. I haven't even looked into that stuff, but I think that's where the open source stuff becomes really interesting. It's like, hey, you've got all these scrappy startups, time is money. So most of them are using APIs that are available and easy and documented and everything else. But as you get bigger and you start scaling and then cost really starts becoming a focus and optimization becomes a focus, how do you what does that look like? Even just the way that OpenAI has architected some of their API stuff now with the agents and having to do different or multiple calls and stuff where it's like it almost feels like you're forcing me to do things that I shouldn't, or I don't necessarily need or want to do, but it's allowing you to make more money. So
by that? Could you say more about
my my intern was messing with it, so he was trying to tell me through. I haven't messed with the OpenAI API directly since they rolled out the new version. So, but apparently they've added a bunch. What we were looking at was we were evaluating how good it was at extracting like metadata from books, right? So instead of me going through and hand noting, in a CSV file, the title, author, published date, ISBN of all these books that we've got, can I feed it into, a multimodal model using the PDFs and just ask it, hey, for each of the PDFs in this folder, extract the title, the author, the ISBN, whatever, right? Extract all the information that you can. Apparently now they've got like agents and different pipelines and stuff. I think it's specifically for if you're using documents, you have to write like this whole process of uploading the document before you ever start doing anything with the GPT, but those are also counting towards your API calls and just additional costs and stuff. I don't even know all the details yet.
The React methodology, I noticed that it's expensive to run those tests. And I think the way that, and I, speaking with other people in the LLM community currently within California where I'm at, I think we're all in a similar space. So like, I think the theme right now is like, everyone needs to give themselves a break. Like, we're all working with these models. We're all doing different things. And there might not be just one solution to a problem. There might be many different solutions and different ways to get there. And we're all working it out. And that's what I love about this particular point in time right now, because it's very creative. It's very much like we're talking now in this podcast and we're sharing information. I think that's very critical right now when working with these models. Now, just to take it a step back for a minute, I think that from my perspective, the way I'm looking at this is like I need to understand or measure the efficacy of my models before we can put them out and deploy them, because we might do all this work and it's no better than the vanilla model.
Yep.
So then what's the point? So like, and then we would have to prove to customers that the guardrails that we put in place for these models do have efficacy and that will not cause risk within our operational environment. It's similar, all oil and gas, I'm sure, is the same. Like you have to ensure that the outputs are, that people will trust the outputs from these models. And then the different models I expect to do later after we have established that we can measure a particular model. I'm looking to do different models and maybe the multi-agent concept down the road after we get past the React methodology. Okay, sorry I'm talking too much.
No, you're good. So I think this is a good time probably because we'll probably get into it and didn't really introduce it. And then maybe I'll let Cam take this, but like, let's talk about shipping intel and the problem you guys are, you've identified or you're going to try to solve. Because I think there's a lot of crossover with what John and Digital Wildcatters are doing with Collide. But just, kind of high level, what are you guys trying to solve, or what is the thesis?
Yeah, two main things. One is we're kind of like at the intersection of technical and professional knowledge, right? And there's a group of us in the maritime industry that are, professional nerds that we enjoy the shipping aspect, but we've jumped into some technical aspect. My background's more in data. Jordan's a little further down the line. There's others. So the big thing, it's been hard. We've seen it done wrong a lot. Some of us have been a part of it on both the development side, working for vendors, on the other side, purchasing stuff. So at the core, right, that's what we're first are trying to do, is just solve problems with technology. However, this kind of led us into the AI space. And so the first thing we really do is just help people see is like, is this even, sorry, we'll edit that part. But the first thing we're kind of doing is just seeing like, what's your problem? Is there a solution for it? Is that solution AI? So a lot of what we do is kind of like the product management for them. and coming in. Then next is to utilize AI, but instead of having to explain all these little terms and invest all this capital to do it, you actually have industry experts who can help you and who aren't afraid to push back, because the concept is not just to be developer for hire. Like, you can find that. Go to Upwork, hire someone to build something, but we want to be like, why are you using this? This isn't gonna work. Like, have you thought about this second or third order effect? So we're trying to kind of be the boutique AI kind of maritime consultant, just help educating people on what it is, and then help them down that process, see if they can, if they even need it, and if they do, then we kind of have some options for them.
That's a really good way to start this, because I think that's something that everyone needs to ask themselves before they pick up the phone and call people like us. And like, hey, I've got all this SCADA data that I want to throw into an AI model, and I want it to tell me everything that's wrong with my operation. And it's like, that's not a language model. Like that's from one of, I mean, we're doing the same thing directly with enterprises, and it's like, people just hear the word AI, right? And they're like, oh, it can solve everything. And it's like, a language model is terrible at numbers, actually. And you do not want to use a language model for numerical data today, at least. And so it's like, yeah, like it's the same hype cycle with every type of technology, right? Like, this was ML 3 years ago, or whenever that was, 5 years ago, whatever it was. And so now people use the words interchangeably, and they think they're different things, or they think different things are the same thing. And so I think that's a big part of it. So one of the things we're doing we're doing a RAG setup just like you guys. The way that we talk to clients about it and stuff is it's augmented search, like at the core of it. Or one of the things it's very good at is, okay, I've got, for example, all these maintenance manuals. I'm an equipment manufacturer, or I run a piece of equipment, and there's all these manuals for all this equipment that we have. And, they're in a binder somewhere. God knows if they've been reprinted since the first editions came out. There's all this discontinuity about where they are, how to find them, where the information is, if it's even updated information, and all of this stuff. And so it's like, when you have a bunch of structured or similarly structured documents like that, it's in my opinion, a very good use case for a language model. If you've got, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these things, and you want to make it quick and easy for the end user to be able to go find the thing that he knows exists. He knows that it's in the system somewhere. He just doesn't know exactly where to find it. Or, another fun thing about technical manuals is they reference a bunch of other technical manuals. And so it's like, I found this. Now I've got to go reference this other thing. It's like, what if it could just string it all together for you and show it all in one place? And so is that kind of, what kind of use cases are you guys seeing and hearing?
Yeah, spot on. Actually, that was one of our first use cases. What was doing that? Around, and I'm sure Jordan will speak to it here in a sec, around some technical documents called CFRs, which is really big in shipping, with all these regulations that you have to go through. So you have to first find them, and then, like you said, they reference somewhere else. Then they have some drawing, right? So the answer may be in the drawing. It's not even in the text.
Right. See figure A75 at the end of the document. And
on another book, by the way. Mm-hmm. Go find it. So that was actually one of the first use cases that we had brought to us on that. Jordan, you want to speak a little bit more on kind of like the technical side of that?
Yeah, we've been building silos full of data. So one of them is a regulatory silo, and then we've been doing a marine ops silo. I'm trying to get a technical silo going, but these are the types of medium, small-sized models that we're making to address specific use cases and specific questions. The way I've been dealing with this currently, because we have to measure the efficacy of the silos against the vanilla model. That's what we're working on currently. But we do inject these silos into a React framework. So where the AI, we train the AI, hey, you could access this tool here, or this sort of framework here to produce an outcome. And we have a layer of AI between the general model and the user that will say, hey, maybe we need to go to this regulatory silo. Maybe we need to use this GIS tool, something like that. And just going, Bobby, like we were discussing GIS tools that you had used as an analyst. Actually, I'm seeing this as a really great use case within the React methodology. So they are able to ingest GIS stuff, lat long coordinates, these sorts of things. What's really exciting to me, I think, and what's making this a little bit different than typical machine learning prior to 2022, is that we can create information out of data using these tools. So really,
absolutely.
What's that?
Can you give us an example of that, or where you going to? And then
like within Maritime, one of our most basic data points is automated information system data. So this is data that ships transmit. We receive it, shore station, satellite, whatever. It gives you where the ship's at in real time. So that's a tool that we can ingest for the Copilot, which we've done. But then you can use that AIS data and combine it with weather, combine it with security information, maritime security levels, those sorts of things, sentiment analysis, and then have it access that tool as well and create some sort of outcome within the Copilot or whatever case you're using for the LLM. So that's, to me, very exciting. And I actually, in the maritime domain, there are repositories for tools for React frameworks. I'm just not seeing much in the maritime space. So it's exciting to me because I feel kind of like, okay, we're in a new area here that we can explore programmatically and try to figure out if this is useful or not, or if it's going to be useful to others.
Yeah, our intern was telling Colin, he was like, some of these libraries we're using aren't very well documented, and he was like, yeah, we're literally on the cutting edge of this stuff. It's not going to be documented. You're full on, exploring this. You're truly wildcatting.
I know I'm going the right direction when my programming Copilot can't do the work for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do I do this with a tool? And then GPT is like coming up with nothing, and I'm like, okay, I know I'm on the right track because no one's done this.
You're asking me questions about myself. So, I mean, interestingly enough, because like typically I'm probably more technical than John in a lot of respects, but this is the domain that I just really have not delved very much into. So, and I understand RAG a little more, but can you talk about React and RAG and what those are, and, for a more layperson, and then the differences and
I'll start with React because I'm super excited about this framework right now.
I was going to say
it's blowing my mind. But
maybe start with just a traditional language model. I did a SPE talk a month or two ago where it was just like breaking down what an LLM is for engineers so they understand that like, hey, this is what a transformer is, and this, like all of those components, so that they truly, because most engineers can understand lots of complex things if it's explained to them properly, not using jargon that they don't understand, and they don't know what an embedding is. But if you just told them what it was, or like vectors, that's the perfect thing, right? Like engineers understand graphs and relationships and geometry, and so like a vector, when you break that down, and it's like, hey, a vector is kind of like a really fancy word cloud, and it's just the relationships of the words to each other, in a bunch of different dimensions, essentially, that we probably have a hard time trying to actually visualize. But, just the fact that like a language model is just a statistical representation of what it thinks should come next. And they're really good at it, but it's not like this, magic box that just knows everything and is going to take over the world tomorrow.
Yeah. It's like a sexy sort of autocomplete. Like, yeah. But again, there's some power in there if you add some different layers.
Oh, for sure.
Models. And no, I agree with you 100%. In fact, the hype cycle, I admit I was a part of that, and I feel like I'm coming down from it right now because I am seeing these models are not great. I have to say it, like they're not great, but I see great potential in creating guardrails.
Exactly.
It's like that's where the potential lies. But as a general model in our domain-specific use cases, I don't know. Like, really needs to have better methods of measuring the efficacy of these models, but I think that it's challenging to think that a vanilla model could handle a highly technical domain. But anyway, so the React part of the models. So we have a bunch of models out there, Llama and OpenAI and these sorts of things. They're foundational models. They hold terabytes of data. They're vectorized into numbers and tags and all these sorts of things. And then it does this parallel search where it just grabs, statistically significant autocomplete component to it. So there's that. What I am excited about currently is React methodology, where the AI, you create a layer between the foundation model and the user, where the AI will decide to use different tools to access either the general model or silos, or go out and get something off of the internet or use a database or something like that to create an outcome. What I'm most excited about is GIS currently within the context of React and using these tools. But I think once these, in plain language, what React does is just what a human does before it makes a decision. So I'm going to use an analogy of being on the bridge of a ship, because I was a deck officer for 12 years. I spent a lot of time on tankers coming in and out of Houston, Orleans, West Coast, internationally. And when we're taking arrival, for instance, we're coming up to the sea buoy, we're taking a pilot, we're heading into, I don't know, some Houston dock or something like that. There's a thought process that we use to get to the sea buoy. We have to pick up the pilot. I got to call the chief mate. We got to get the anchors ready to let go.
There's a procedure almost, right?
Yeah, there's a procedure happening. So how I'm currently explaining React methodology, if you zero shot it, which means you just send a query to a foundational model, you're going to get a result back. What React does is it says, I'm going to check this, and I'm going to check this document. So if I'm on the bridge of a ship and I'm doing a pre-arrival gear test or something like that, I have a checklist in front of me and I'm doing all these things. And I say, I have to check the thing and do this. If there's an emergency, I have to check this thing. So what React's doing is just going through that process of thinking, how am I going to do this logically and create an outcome? So zero shot is more like knee jerking, and I'm just kind of using a human explanation here. React methodology is more like thinking it through and using maybe source text or silos or proprietary data or something like that before coming to that conclusion. I'm seeing very good efficacy using this methodology in the maritime domain. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so
Jordan,
an example.
Oh, sorry, John.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask to make sure we understood, because I don't know if it was mentioned, but Jordan's a professor, Cal Maritime, right? So all the examples are shipping, but not everyone might understand the shipping piece of it. So I was just going to say, for someone super lay, would you say if I'm going out to the club to talk to a girl, I can either just go myself after a few shots, but React is your buddy saying, hey, bro, what are you about to say? What are you about to say right now? Talking over with Bobby. Let's think through this. All right, before you go. Is that the simplest version we can come up with?
Yeah, there's a check. There's a double check against it. So that works.
React would be Bobby going up and cold opening and then introducing you, versus you going up and just shooting your shot with your one pickup line.
Shot. Hey, you like short guys?
React actually stands for reasoning in action. Reasoning in action. That's what React stands for.
Opposed to just action. Gotcha.
Depends on how many drinks you got in you, right?
I know. I mean, dude. So, all right.
No, that's another. I mean, an example of that would be using metadata, right? So, hey, here's two results that match similarity wise, but this one is 20 years newer than the other one. So let's prioritize the newer one because people want relevant information, right? Just as at the simplest level. I know that's kind of a watered down version of that, but that's the thing. People don't think about, you're part of a lot of this is just search. It's similarity context, and it's looking for the most likely answer, next answer, whatever. And so that's one of the things we're in the middle of. And it's the 80-20 rule, as with all things ETL and data science. You spend 80% of your time getting the data and all the data about the data before you actually do anything with it. And so, but like that is so important, right? So if I just have these books, for example, our current production version is just the source documents. There's no metadata about any of them. But we tell people what the source document is. The next iteration will have title, author, published date, and the link directly to the book if you want to go look at it, or the article or the paper or whatever it may be. And it's like, just by having those extra pieces of metadata, we're going to be able to deliver significantly better answers because we have additional context, just like all of your data. It's just like normal data science to a certain extent.
John, how are you like tagging and annotating all that extra contextual data?
We're throwing it into a JSON blob, and then we're using Quadrant as our vector database. So it has key value pairs, and it's closer to a traditional database in some aspects, as far as at least like metadata and tagging and stuff like that. It's not a traditional database by any means, but just having that data contextualized with each chunk,
Right.
because that's the other part, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But it's not just throw a bunch of documents into a database. It's okay, you've got to figure out what the structure of the documents are. Then you've got to figure out how do you contextually keep the relevant pieces of the information. So like a textbook, or actually papers are perfect for this, right? Like, let's get into this, because as people, Jordan and I are in this shit every day, and no one understands it unless you're in the middle of it. But it's like, if I have an SP paper or a technical paper, right? They split the page in 2 columns. Well, depending on how whatever you're using reads that, it could either read it straight down and then over and down like it should be, or it could just read it all the way across. And so it's like, if it reads it across, that's obviously not what you want, because those aren't contextualized. But if you have a header at the top of one and then it continues over to the next page, whatever's on that next page needs to be part of that first paragraph. It doesn't need to be included with the next header. And so like breaking things up by headers, indexing them, or the page numbers, all of those things, you're essentially trying to deconstruct every piece of every document that you have so that you can reconstruct it on the back end, because you have to understand, like, okay, it was talking about this topic and then it moved on to that topic. That topic is technically relevant, but it's not important to the question that they are asking or looking for. And so there's a lot that goes into that. And then you got to go chunk it. So then it's like, okay, chunking is a whole nother thing, which no one knows. It's a complete inexact science that people are still trying to figure out. And so there's a lot that goes into it that, just under the hood, that a lot of people don't have any idea about.
It took me a long time, more than I want to admit, to figure that out. But yeah, that was a thing. I thought initially, I was first to start working with these models, I just throw all the unstructured data in and it would somehow work itself out. No.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, though, is it's like, and I've talked about this before, like, good technology is good, but it is also detrimental in a sense, because it makes people feel like it's easier than it actually is, right? So like when everything started and they had the GPTs and the assistants and stuff, it's like, oh, I can throw my textbook in there and it'll let me search it. And it's like, that's actually a really good use case for that type of thing, because it's one document, right? So, okay, what happens if I throw 1 million textbooks on the same topic in there? Then it's going to be a lot harder, because the context has all this overlap. There's not a bunch of metadata. What if it's over a 20-year time span? You want to know what the dates are so that you know which one is the most relevant contextually. And so there's all this extra stuff that goes into it that you just don't know until you start doing it. And so, I love that they have these kind of low code or documented tools that it gets people interested in, and it's easy to stand up and start testing. I mean, our production model right now started as our, like, hey, let's see what the hell this can do if we throw a bunch of stuff into Pinecone and just see what happens. And it's decent. It's not great, but it was enough for us to say, hey, this is the path we're going to go down. We know that we can get these results a lot better if we put a lot more time and effort into it. And so now but on the flip side, again, it's one of those things where it's like, it makes it feel like it's a lot easier and like anybody can go do it. Not saying that, anybody can't, but it's a lot more work than you think, trying to get a production quality model.
Well, Bobby and I were talking before the podcast started. I think one thing that is happening for sure is that the development process and the control over these models, or just generally data science, is moving more towards subject matter experts, if I may say this. I hate to say it, but I think that the being able to get this far, I mean, I'm kind of a knucklehead, and to get as far, to get into these models and be able to work with them in this way is, as an SME, is pretty amazing. Like, we couldn't do this 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And
Absolutely.
I'm at the point now where, and I was talking with Bobby, like I teach grad school undergrad, but I'm telling the students, I'm like, learning Python or learning like programmatic methods or these sorts of things will benefit you long term, even if you never go into coding or software development. Because when you're a mid or senior level manager and you're working with BAs or product managers or whatever, it's going to benefit you to look at things like logically and put them in blocks and user stories and all these sorts of things, and then see what, hey, on the engineering side, what does this look like? Super beneficial. And I was telling Bobby, I'm like, we teach, even at the collegiate level, they teach, French or second language sort of thing. We should be teaching data science as a second language, because I think it has broad applicability. And it's certainly, with, like Cameron and I talk about this a lot, like there's a lot of overlap between data science and just generally within our maritime domain. I mean, it's incredible. So having that kind of like bilingual sort of capacity, I think, is really important today.
Yeah, no, I think being able to think in data science will benefit anybody, no matter what job they go into, especially moving forward, because data is such a crucial part, regardless of the industry, regardless of what your job is. There will be data involved, and just understanding like, hey, if I structure this table this way, then I can put it in a database, versus if I do it this way, probably not so great for using in a database. And it's like, those are things that like, I'm a mechanical engineer with a master's in business. Like I have no business dealing with language models. But one of the things that allowed me to do that was I can use a language model to help me code, because I understand code. I've never formally been trained on it, but I don't have the, instead of going to Stack Overflow and finding someone's code that was close enough and modifying it until I figure out how to do it, I can just tell the language model what I'm trying to do, and it gets me 80-90% there, and significantly faster too. I'm curious on Bobby's perspective.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I've had some people, in the last year or two ask me about moving out of their current, job and into data. Like a lot of them, they end up naturally going to do like a Google Python certification and all stuff, and that's great. But I usually tell them, I think maybe to your point, Jordan, is like, don't go get a data job first. Like, go, get your foot in the door, at some company in whatever domain it is, because like John said, there's going to be data there, and like get in there, and there's going to be processes, and get in there and like use that code to automate processes, to automate reports, like to things that they're running monthly. Learn how to so that someone can see them daily. Make people's jobs easier, lives easier with code. And it doesn't have to be coding. I mean, I know Cam was doing that with, like light, low code stuff like QuickBase and Power BI and all that kind of stuff. And probably good to get Cam's perspective on this. But like, just get in, understand the business, and then figure out how you can be useful. And again, code is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, I was actually going to ask you guys a little bit your experience on this, because, if whatever tool you have in your bag when you show up to your house, that's normally how you're going to recommend to fix it, right? But a lot of times we're on these calls and I'm like, no, what you really need is just like a simple database and a Power BI, and then we can embed that into your CRM, and your boss has all the reports they need. Like, you don't need all of this, and kind of that whole data maturity of, like John, you mentioned, like collections, it's not sexy, but how you collect the data can save a lot on the whole ETL and all these tools that we got to hire people to clean up. But it's like, we could just change the collection a little bit, and maybe whoever it is doesn't care, and it can have a huge impact. So that's one thing too, of like trying to see it holistically and use each tool appropriately, because large language models have a lot of power, But sometimes the boss just needs to see what the quarterly numbers were, and it's like, hey guys, and we'll have to kind of skip from like A to Z when there's this progression on that. And then the other thing with that is that I've just kind of seen is the reason I'm a kind of a low code evangelist is because truthfully, none of us can predict the future. All right, I'm old enough to remember Miss Cleo. She had a run, but she's not on TV anymore because TV doesn't really exist anymore. So she couldn't see social media come in, so she didn't know nothing. All right. So, anyways, no one can predict. So, like, you think that what we're doing, I could ask you all the discovery questions in the world, and we ironed out the problem, but you just really don't know. So, like, I love using low code to get to 80% as fast as possible, put it in front, and then you bring in someone to take you the rest of the way. That's actually what I did with QuickBase's low code tool. And then I brought in Bobby to do pro code on top of it. But not until I saw our users like this is it. So even with large language models, and that it's like, I'm a big proponent of kind of like that 80%. Let's see how this looks. Are we on the right path before going all in on that?
Well, and I think
Yeah.
you talk about some of those fundamentals. I mean, let's talk about, say, Power BI. I mean, obviously Microsoft is, investing heavily in OpenAI, but then also have, their copilots and everything based off that. But let's say, one of the data fundamentals that basically has been around forever, but is a core piece of, say, Power BI is like data modeling into like a star schema, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you actually like modeled your data appropriately in SQL Server or Snowflake, whatever, some SQL database, and you did it in a proper star schema, and then that was loaded into a data model in Power BI. Like, now you can actually probably utilize some of those Gen AI, like voice to query type things, because you've actually modeled your data correctly and you have it in a good format for that to use.
I would almost go as far as say, like, you got to start there first. Like, just please, just
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Like, just start there, and then, like, if you want to do a machine learning algorithm off of that to start kind of teasing to get there. But especially on the structured data side, on the unstructured data side, like, OpenAI and these models are fantastic, and combining them, that's outside my scope, but that's what I make Jordan work on. But having that, just a simple star schema, I think would do wonders for a lot of
But
people.
you talk about blending those worlds. Like, now that you have these multimodal things, like, and I can feed a PDF, and like, I know John's used it for some of this. Like, we say, I'm sure there's similar reports in maritime, and I do want to get into maybe some of the parallels between maritime and oil and gas, because I think just being industrial, there's probably the element of being laggards and so on. But there's a ton of shit sent in oil and gas via PDF, and a ton of important data. And like,
I was gonna say, it's pretty much exclusively important data.
Yeah.
It's like all the shit that people want to know goes
But
into the format that's least digestible.
Yeah, but no one, it's all the same data, but no one sends it in the same format.
Right.
So, like, and can I feed it a bunch of drilling and completions reports and say, give me, the date, time, TBD, all these different parameters, but pull it out, but now put it into a tabular data set. Use that, and AI is getting a lot better at that than having to do Pi PDF or even some of this, other shit that has been out there.
Yeah. I have a question. I don't want to disrupt us here, but curious, has anyone like had like a nice clean data set, like a little star schema, and then used like OpenAI to query that? How's that perform?
1000%.
And
I don't have to write SQL anymore. I don't have to learn SQL.
I think even Microsoft has had that within Power BI for a few years now, right? Where you can like ask it a question of your data model, and it'll return the answer.
I was actually on the target group for the Q&A product. If you remember that on Power BI.
Yeah.
But what happened with us in shipping, which is, I don't know in your world, but in the airline industry, is like if you have a port can be an arrival and a destination, but it also can be an asset itself. So either you have to decide, do I have an arrival table and a destination table with the same port in it, or do I just have a ports table? And that's where, for us in shipping, it struggled because it was like, which table do I look at? Because this port's all over the place. But yeah, I was just kind of curious if like that juice was worth the squeeze to kind of combine those two.
Oh no, I backed up our bubble data tables by exporting them, taking the first 10 rows, plugging them into GPT and saying, write me a SQL. First, I started with write me the SQL so that I could insert this into a new SQL table. Then I was like, I wonder if I could just have it output the SQL file for me. And it did. And then I opened it using, what was it, Workbench, imported it, and I never wrote a single line of code and stood up an entire backup of my my database. I was just like, this is stupid how quick this stuff is getting out there. And but it's just enablement. Like at the end of the day, everything that we're talking about, whether it's AI, ML, even just basic analytics, you have to have good data. That's where our industry has been laggards for sure, because we have been collecting a ton of data for decades. I mean, we've got 30, 40 years plus of well production and all this stuff, but it's in shitty formats. There's no standardized naming conventions. It's in also PDF rant. PDF is not a good format. We need to quit putting shit in PDFs because it's not actually a format. It's just a catch-all for everything else. And it's very difficult to extract information from.
And is it a picture PDF or is it an actual PDF?
Exactly. Is the metadata encoded in the PDF or is it not? Like there's so much to it. But it's that's what's making all the language model data folks' lives miserable, because we're trying to deal with all these PDF formats that are just terrible.
But then I guess stepping back, Cam, and again, maybe this is a good product for you guys to consider. I mean, I think Jordan talked about earlier, putting those guardrails. Like, what if one of the first things that you all did, or someone in our industry, like, was, all right, let's identify what is. I mean, there's probably as much difference or similarities, and like you could probably create a common data model. And I'm sure there's definitely people in oil and gas who've tried to do it through what's called the PPDM. But are there organizations who have tried to come up with like a common data model for maritime? And then
the International Maritime Organization is working on that currently. But I don't think they're at the LLM part. I think.
Well, but what I'm saying is, like, if you can get people's data into a common format, and then you know how to write queries against it. So then you provide 100 queries with the question, like, this is how I would write the query to answer this question, and then you feed that. Could you then have an agent that people can ask questions of that data model in that data model to write the query and get it out?
So Bobby, you nailed it. Like this is the great use of the tool in the React methodology, is to be able to access grounded true source or data that is verifiable before producing an output, which will reduce bias and hallucination. So I know on the maritime side, like there's like data integrity in a very conventional sense. Like if a sensor transmits this float value, that we want to receive this float value, we want 100% correct. And in the maritime domain, the reason we do this is to reduce operational and commercial risk, of course. Having good data will make things safer for everybody. But when we add the layer of these foundation models that are prone to bias and hallucination, now, and this is what I'm concerned about, is I want to make sure that the outcomes are grounded truth, like they are correct. Because if they aren't, in the maritime domain, that could amount to millions of dollars of cost in terms of commercial costs or risk to equipment and safety on the operational side. So super important, and I don't think really people are like cluing in on this currently, but they have to, and we have to get past this stage at a point in this AI journey, at least within maritime.
Well, I think this is a great time to draw those parallels I was talking about, because I think something John and I talk about constantly. But is that these industrial type, whether it's oil and gas or maritime or whatever, like, again, like, and we've said it before, but if Spotify, if its model is wrong, I just say next song, or if someone thinks that, the girl on Tinder is not attractive, I move on.
You're
right?
Like, Tinder, Bobby, but it's fine. A little old for Tinder. You try to make yourself than you are. You were probably married before Tinder came out, Bobby.
I know. I'm going off of what people told me.
I'm just saying. For the record.
Maybe I don't know.
The source of truth. Check Bobby's Facebook.
Nonetheless, any of these kind of like again, like it's very low risk because if it picks the wrong song, I just move on to the next song. But again, like I mean, oil and gas, maritime, like if these models, whether it's machine learning or now generative AI, are wrong, and people rely too much on them without any guardrails, then there's like millions, billions of dollars, I mean, life, limb, like all kind of implications that can happen.
One thing, I don't know how this parallels to you guys, but there's some trust issues in the maritime industry. So when a ship comes in the port, there's this document called Statement of Facts. And it's kind of like a box score, right? This is what happened, boom, boom, boom. That gets generated by the ship. It can get generated by a surveyor. It can get generated by the agent. And then the cargo, who the charter could also appoint their own agent. So you're going to have 4 copies of this one document. We're all going to use different words. Some care, like the surveyor cares more about the cargo. Others care about this because of their contract. And there's a constant game. This is what Jordan was kind of going with, like with the ground of truth. The first issue is like, do we agree on the times? Then we'll argue about who's the better baseball team, but do we agree on the scoreboard first? And that's a big component. And I think a lot of developers who come in our industry struggle because they're like, this is right. I'm like, dude, shipping, there is no, this is right. It's like, this is what you can negotiate and agree upon. Like you can be wrong and you're still going to agree upon something else. And a lot of, they're used to stuff that's like binary. I'm like, there's no right, there's no wrong. There's a contract and there's stuff that happens in the world. And our job is to provide the information. So depending where they are in the equation, you can address the situation and do it faster and bring all those efficiencies. So that's one unique challenge in our industry of this is that there's an arbitration clause in everything we do for a reason.
That sounds very similar to a lot of oil field operations, right? So like Bobby is an operator. They own and operate the wells. On any given frac site, you're going to have a frac company, you're going to have a wireline company, you're going to have a company man, you might have a third-party consultant, you're going to have water transfer, you're going to have the chemicals, you're going to have the sand. All of them are independent organizations in some cases. They all have their own reports. They all have their own reporting format. They all have their own data sets. And they all go to Bobby, and Bobby's job is to figure out how to make it all make sense. Like you've got timelines, the times are all over the place. I'm sure you've got naming conventions where it's like the wireline company called it this, but the frac company called it that. And then it's the same thing in a lot of senses. Is like everyone has their own bias, whether they realize it or not, but it's all reflected in the data that they end up reporting. And it all goes back to Bobby, and they have to be the ones that kind of wrangle and figure out what the truth actually is in all of it. But you're right. It's like it isn't, coding is very logical, right? And like we can get very hung up on that, but reality is very black and white and very shades of gray. And so like, that's typically what the real world answer is. It's like, it's not yes or no. It's just somewhere in between that, right? Like, it's very hard to reflect that from data.
The maritime side with like buy-in, like getting buy-in with clients and customers.
Sorry, what was the question?
How has it been in the maritime industry getting buy-in to use AI or even data? I mean, like, because again, I assume they're very similar in that way, oil and gas and maritime.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Jordan. No. It's all right. No. You have the...
So I think everyone's trying to figure this out. I think that the people who are not like AI savvy are kind of looking at this like, oh, we have this new technology, can we apply it? And then there's the other side where, we're working with it day to day and we're like, well, this is great, but this isn't so great, but maybe this has potential or whatever. And then bringing the two together. And I think what the biggest thing is right now, I would say, if we're dealing with customers, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Like, is it clear? And then what outcome do you want? And then once those two things are in place, then we can start working.
Yeah.
If it's more like on the customer side, like, well, we think we just want to be an AI first company. We're a ship owner, but we want to be AI first. Well, okay, we need to unpack that further. And then if you do come, if a customer does come with it, like, we want to do technical drawings, we want to identify where all the fire alarms are in the technical drawings. Like, we have this one image that we want to search for, and the output is we want to know the X number of fire alarms that are in this technical. That's easy. That's a very clear problem statement and a very clear outcome. So that's a bit easier. So I think the challenge right now is just like, for AI first companies or people making co-pilots or making AI first solutions, they have to have a clear question from the customer, and then the customer has to be open with like finding the correct outcome or what outcome they want from that model.
Yeah.
But again, go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted you. That's what I like to do. Sure.
I think the SME part, though, like, is super important right now from the development side and from the AI side. Like, I think the kind of, if I may say, I hate to say this because there's decades of work done by data analysts, scientists, and computer programmers to get us to the point we're at now. So I'm super appreciative of all the effort that people have made for decades. That being said, I think there is a lot of like sort of, I feel like the focus is now going on the SME rather than the developers, because for me, being in the trenches with these React tools or whatever, it's really hard if you don't have subject matter expertise to understand like how to get from A to B without using GIS tools, for instance, or understanding like what revenue is in the context of shipping, or these different things where the tools could be very efficacious in these roles. But if you're working in that big development environment, no one knows the vocabulary, very difficult. Okay.
Yeah. Even the workflow, right? Just like you were talking about with the port stuff, right? Like, if a developer had no context and they just had all those, what is the name of that document?
Statement of fact.
Yeah. If they were just given those and said, okay, figure out what happened, like, they would be lost because they have no context of understanding like how that works in the real world versus an SME who's done it, who understands, okay, well, this is why they're off. And like, we don't need this data because that's just junk. Like, it's so much harder. And I kind of agree with you, Jordan. Like, it's almost like the Web 2, Web 3 kind of thing in a sense, where it's like Web 2 to me is these foundational models where it's like everything to everybody, right? It's like a good general thing, but then because it's everything to everybody, it's not really anything to anybody when you try to get specific to it. And so now you've got all these SME, like industry focused tools popping up because that's what they need. And it's the same thing with, the social side where, I mean, that's kind of our thesis with our platform is that, LinkedIn is great, but it's not built for the energy industry by any means. And so why can't we build a professional platform for the energy vertical? There's been a bunch of companies that have done this across pharma, like ag, even. Like, there's a huge company in agriculture. It's like 50,000 farmers, and they've got like $1 billion plus market cap because it's super valuable. I think their revenue per user is like 10x what LinkedIn and some of the other socials are. And so I think that's kind of how this is going to evolve as well, where you have this constant progress on the foundational models, whether they're, the big ones or the small ones made for kind of mobile and all of that. But the real value that gets extracted from these on an enterprise or corporate level has to come from SMEs getting their hands on it and either doing a RAG or fine tuning.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting though about the market for us, right? I don't know if you guys seen this, but there's a little bit of a technology, I don't know, call it hangover. But like, I mean, come on, man, we heard this before with blockchain. We heard this before with machine learning, and like, I got it. This is cool. I can write in LinkedIn posts that we all knew use ChatGPT on, but so our industry, I feel, is a little numb right now to this. Like, okay, but the other thing that's unique is, it's not a cool article to say, like Jordan said, you got to find a real world problem that this is the solution for, right? Because people will take your call for cool stuff, but they're not going to pay you for cool
Right.
stuff, right? So
Yeah,
they'll
you can waste a
talk to
lot
you.
of time on cool
Yeah.
stuff.
They'll talk to you. Oh yeah, this is great. But if you can't get to the bottom line, which this leads to one thing that's really, I think, interesting about supply chain that people struggle with, because maritime is part of supply chain. Just because something is incredibly inefficient from the outside, guess where it goes? To the next part of the supply chain. Guess where it goes? So to the next. So like problems, when people from the outside with millions of dollars raising funds, they look and they say it's a problem. Like, but it's not a problem to the bottom line because you're just rebuilding it and rebuilding. I mean, it's a supply chain. It ends up
It's
being
passed through.
a problem for my wife buying toys or whatever it is, but it ends down the chain. So the problem has to be directly related to their P&L. All right, it just can't be like an annoyance. And also, where is the problem lies, another thing people struggle with. They're like, this is wildly inefficient, but I'm like, that's kind of like a back office thing. It's not time sensitive, has a big P&L, but it's like that's not where the big money exchange is. So that's one thing that's unique is there are problems in our industry, but they have to stick with you. You're not, if it passes down the supply chain, it doesn't get the same love. It has to be, you got to find a way to pull it into that P&L.
No, that overlaps perfectly on our end, right? Like chemical providers, right, that provide frac chemicals, they track their chemicals in most cases. Why would they have any incentive to have more accuracy on their chemicals? Because they're turning around and marking it up and charging Bobby for it. So it's just more revenue for them if they're inaccurate. It doesn't really matter, even if that screws up their supply chain, because it's like, hey, this thing has a 10%, error, and now we're out of it because it said it should be there, but the accuracy caused it to be off, and now we're stuck because we don't have the chemical because we didn't order it soon enough or whatever. It's kind of amazing how. But you're right. It all boils down to like it has to be a direct pain point for them, or it's not going to matter. It could be a cool thing, but they're not going to pay you for it.
Right. We even saw that with predicting ships ETAs. Right. Everyone's like, oh, that's really important. That's really important. And it is, but it's like, but they weren't willing to pay for it. It wasn't that
Right.
important. Like they'd rather just keep calling someone and ask and complaining that it's running late. Because until it gets there, you can't actually make any real changes because all the contracts were pretty much done before. So that was one thing that was really interesting because the market was really pulling that hard. Hey, if you could do this, that'd be huge. And then someone did, and no one bought it. Because the
Sounds very
problem
familiar.
of the shipment being late, everyone has contract clause that just pushes that down the pipe.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There's
incredibly excited currently about bringing in sensor information into these models. That's like, I am super excited.
What are you seeing on that front? Because I'm very curious.
Like bringing in, so in maritime, like we have this concept of static and dynamic data. Static is like doesn't move. Dynamic data moves around. Ship is a dynamic data point because it moves around, changes position all the time. So bringing that data in, movement data, weather, security conditions, sentiment analysis, all these sorts of things, and then trying to model within the React framework is exciting to me because then you can use the power of the foundation model to create outcomes from those models. This is different than prior to 2022. We couldn't do this, I don't believe. It was more like traditional ML. And the problem is in the maritime, and I'll shut up in a minute. The problem is in the maritime, we have so many diverse data points, and they're all mutable, and they all can change, and we have like data that we're missing currently and all this sort of thing. So I'm just seeing the modeling of that data within this kind of environment having more efficacy than prior to 2022. And I don't think I'm the only one. Like Sequoia Capital, for instance, is looking at AI first companies over the next decade as having a $10 trillion revenue pipeline or something like that. That's like 10 times what cloud is right now. So for sure, like the big hitters are looking to the future here, and they're looking at AI first companies. But the way I'm looking, being in the trenches is the AI first companies are going to be ones that put guardrails and conditions on these foundational models and making efficacy in answering the question that the customers are asking.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest thing is how do you sell someone that your model is better? I mean, we've gotten this question already. Why are you going to be better than Microsoft for me? Yeah. Right. And it's like, okay, well, now I have to have quantifiable evidence to show them that if I give ChatGPT, like,
just tell them to call Microsoft. And let me know how that goes.
Let me ask you, John, do you think the foundation models are going to get better from here? What's your?
Oh man, I think they're, you've got one camp that's focused on the performance because they're all incentivized to distribute the compute back onto the user devices so they don't have to pay for it, right? So that's where you see like the Phi and the small models coming out because that's going to be their goal, whoever that is, whether that's Meta or Microsoft, whoever, they're going to push as much of that shit out to the phone or to your laptop or whatever it is so that they don't have to pay for it in their cloud. But it's a cool, fun, small model. They're gonna advertise it one way, but the true intentions of it are probably something very different. And then I think the bigger models, I mean, to me, those are going to start boiling. You're going to hit some kind of ceiling at some point until another new technology comes around. And I think the new technology aspect is going to be in this like thought process, whatever we're calling that, where it can break down the sentence, understand intent, understand, okay, logic, right? Like first they want me to go to this table, then it wants me to do an aggregation on that table. So I need to write a SQL query to do that aggregation on that table. Then it wants to display that table in a chart. So now I need to put it in a chart and then I need to display it, right? Like that is going to be like, that's where the gap to me, one of the gaps is for the AGI conversation is that right now these models have a ton of information, but they don't have any true knowledge, right? It's just regurgitation of statistical hierarchy, essentially. But at some point, there will be a model, somebody will make it, who knows, that understands the logic about a question and then can go execute in this kind of agentic React format. That's where everything's going, right? The agents are the same kind of concept. You can see how that evolves into this thing that can think, so to speak. I've even seen prompt engineering stuff where people are like, they just put in think before you act or whatever it was, and it resulted in a much better answer. And so those are the things that I think really, that's kind of the future of it for me. I have no idea when that's going to happen. But I do think that, one, I think another element of this is the numeric data, right? Like we've spent the last decade getting all this data into databases and tables in the cloud and stuff. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we get that text to SQL? There are people working on it. Someone will solve that as well, in my opinion. And hopefully it becomes open source at some point. But where it's like, yeah, I want to do all this stuff. So then you combine that with the agents, and the agents understand, oh, I need to go use this SQL model that understands how to query SQL to go do this thing. Because we have it too. We have people asking for stock data or, all of the earnings stuff. And it's like, how do you can right now, the easiest way to do that I've found is to contextualize it. You have to put it into a sentence so that it understands. But I foresee that changing in the future as well, so that you don't have to put it into a sentence. You can just put it into a data table and tie it together with metadata or IDs. And then it can, cause even now we can reference, images, figures, tables and stuff from PDFs directly. Perplexity is doing that with their tool. We're working on that with ours. And so you can see that continuing to kind of iterate forward, where it's like, it's not just referencing a table, it's actually generating the table, or it's generating the plot from a data set that you also own or it has access to.
John, one thing that when to go back, Jordan was talking about sensor data, especially like on the ships. And one thing that is really exciting is Starlink. Now, more ships are putting on Starlink, and to actually retrieve, kind of more of the old IoT,
to stream it.
Getting the data off the ships is like we're starting, like it's on the cusp, right? And like that's going to be, because right now, like they're out there, but it's been like that's been a problem. As yeah, Bobby, we talked about this too with back with Hy-Vee, right? Or what
Type
was
cell, yeah.
Yeah, Hive cell, yeah.
yeah.
That was
So
one of
we're
our
trying,
first pilots. Was on a boat.
yeah,
We put a Hive cell cluster and stood up Ignition Edge, or it wasn't the Edge version at that point. It was just the full version of Ignition
yeah,
running
because
running on the boat.
yeah, well, 'cause what we've done in the maritime industry is like we take all the information whenever we get it. Then on the shore, you find the answer. Then you send
Right.
it back to someone, right? And it's like, oh, by
It's too
then
late.
Too late.
it's,
Yeah.
it's too late. But then if it's out there, you're like, man, but we don't trust people. We need to be able to see and control your every move because everyone loves that. Being told what to do from someone 2,000 miles away. So, but the Starlink is opening up a lot, and especially in shipping that I see kind of coming. That
It's the
I
same
don't think
in
everyone
our
will be ready
space.
for.
It's the same in the oil field too. It's there's been a lot of tech companies, again, they're acquiring data in order to feed their software so they can do analytics and all kinds of fun, sexy, cool shit. But
Yeah.
that's been limited because just like this is a very big overlap in our industries, right? Just like a boat being out in the middle of the ocean, you might as well be in the middle of the ocean in some of these oil fields. You're literally in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours from the closest gas station, right? Like there's no cell reception, there's nothing. And so it's like, okay, well, time is money, and 90% of an operator's cost is in drilling and completing a well. And so that's where all the operations are. And then, so it's like, okay, well, so this data is valuable. If we can reduce the amount of time it takes us to do that and reduce the amount of downtime that we have between them or on a single well, or how do we do more than one well at the same time? Because all the that's the weirdest part about oil field is you're essentially bringing the manufacturing to the most remote, to the most inhospitable environment you could, and then hoping that nothing goes wrong. And so you've got to bring all the logistics, you got to bring all the water, you got to bring all the sand, all the chemicals, all the trucks, all the equipment, all the people. And so and then 2 weeks later, you go move 2 hours down the road to do the exact same thing. And so you have a lot of, that's where a lot of money is spent, like I said, is on those operations, and time is absolutely money when it comes to that. So being able to have that data to allow you to predictively say, hey, based off the last 5 wells in this area, this is what we think is going to happen. So be ready for it. Just like simple. I mean, that sounds simple, but a lot going on under the hood behind that. But those are very impactful things to an operator versus like, hey, can I, find something using a search? But it's tricky,
I think what's exciting, and I'm going to get into the science fiction realm here.
I love it.
I think what's exciting on the maritime side is we traditionally had roles, stakeholders, basically, as you're saying, like different people involved in the maritime adventure. We have operations personnel, we have stakeholders, we have charters, we have vessel owners, and sorts of things. Traditionally, how we've siloed these areas of concern is we have a technical side, we have an operations side, and we have a commercial side. I think it's the same everywhere. But what's exciting to me is and I'm talking at a very high level here, is that we can make these react agents, reasoning and action agents, specifically targeted to these operations, commercial, technical. But here's where it gets exciting to me, is like the multi-agent concept within the LLMs, where we can have these agents talking with each other. This is exactly what we do in real life. Like,
right.
I don't know, on tanker, we show up at the dock, we get with the terminal, we hook up the hoses, we have different government agencies on board, we have our owners above us, the charters, the cargo owners, all these different people, and they're all actively involved in this situation. Wouldn't it be amazing to have all of the background and knowledge that each of these agents have and be able to kind of construct a model where they're able to talk with each other? I think this will get us closer to that concept of grounded truth and like containment of information that we need in our respective industries.
How scared are you of those agents developing their own language to talk to each other? Who was that? Was
Have
that
you
Google
heard of it?
a couple of years ago?
I had not thought of that before.
No, there was I think it was Google. I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. There's some, I don't even know if it's, don't fact check me on this, but I've heard stories about them having to shut down some early iteration of some AI model that they built because it had developed its own language. Like they were talking to each other in some crazy
Oh
code.
no.
And they were like, oh, maybe we unplug that. So the future is going to be wild
Or in
regardless.
the wrong hands. I mean,
No, yeah, for sure. Well, and that's I think that's the other crazy part about all of this is there's still a lot of explainability that people are working on, fortunately, but there's a lot of people that don't realize that we really don't know all the ins and outs of how these things work.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing I know is that I don't know. The only thing is that there is literature out currently where the reasoning and acting methodologies, they've seen it as far as OpenAI, they've seen 4.0 performance out of a 3.5 model. And using 4.0, they are saying that perhaps they're getting a 5.0, which hasn't been released yet, performance out of the 4.0 using these methodologies. But it's not AGI. It's not like we're still in the general whatever it is, but we're not at that point where it's like learning. So I'm a little bit more reserved. I'm not sure the models are getting that much better, but I am seeing a lot of action here in the reasoning and action and toolkit usage.
So we are running up on our time here. We want to do like maybe just 2 questions, each guy answer one, and wrap it up.
Jordan, I'll ask you.
Kind of not a rapid fire kind of thing, just quick answer kind of deal. But I'll kick it off. What's your favorite open source tool?
Python.
Python. Yeah. All right. Deeper. Favorite Python library then?
My favorite Python? Pandas.
Pandas. Okay. Have you messed with polars yet or no?
What's that?
Have you messed with polars or no?
I have not.
Oh, Bobby's going to blow your mind.
It's like kind of a
I am working with Feather and Pandas, which is like I'm seeing such a huge performance upgrade.
Yeah.
Using
Well,
Feather.
and then have you messed with Modin on Pandas? It's a one-line drop in and it parallelizes your Pandas code, MODIN. But polars is written in Rust and it's supposed to be like super fast, and people like the API better. So.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had in my master's program, I had a machine learning course, and I had to call Jordan to have him help me. All right, in my little Jupyter notebook. So, I don't have a lot there.
Quick base.
My world came more on the kind of like the classic data side, than actually on the coding piece.
What's your favorite database?
Well, when I was just pretty simple. I love low code though, so I'm going to answer this question, I promise. But like the one thing that I have maybe sometimes too much customer empathy, because like a lot of the data guys make the front end harder for the users because they want it nice and clean there. But like I made our ETL did a lot of work, and we are a Microsoft shop, so we just use Data Factory, everything to bring it in, and then brought it in. But man, we had a lot of scripts to clean up our mess, but that's because I was so sensitive in there. But yeah, we were just beta. But man, we had this one. It was just one big, powerful, beastly model. And then that's when I learned that you also need to make sure that you optimize. You need to optimize them. They can't just work on a little query that at some point there is performance. So I did a lot of things backwards and went through the YouTube Academy.
That's how you learn it, though.
Yeah.
You gotta start somewhere. Yep. But
Jordan, what's a ML AI book that you would recommend people check out, or a social follow? Either one.
I have a. Oh no! I had artificial intelligence. If you just Google it, incredible book. This was written it has the whole transformer thing in there. It has all of that like LLM stuff, but it was like preceding the release of GPT in 2022. But absolutely outstanding book and well written. So it's artificial intelligence, and I can't remember who the author is. But if you just go on Amazon and type in artificial, it'll come up. It's the first hit.
Cool.
Hey, I did this. You guys can edit this out, but a really cool tool that's open source to check out is Camunda. You want it's around workflows, and then you can gather data, and it's really awesome. It's a great tool and really would help with like multiple parties and building these simple applications. The pain in the butt is it drops everything in like these complex JSON files, but once you get through it, Camunda is a really cool tool.
How do you spell
That's
that?
a good one.
Camunda. Camunda.
All right, same book question to you, Cam. Either just what's a good book you'd recommend for someone either on the data or tech side?
All right, I want to tell you my favorite data book is called Naked Statistics. It's a beautiful book. He actually has a series of a bunch of different data topics, but statistics to me is one of those that was always a little challenging. He broke it down with real world examples, and it really helps you kind of just bridge that gap, and it's less academic to kind of jump into the statistic world.
Sweet.
What's the name of the book again?
Naked Statistics. I'll see if I had it.
Nathan Statistics.
Naked.
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 Okay.
Yeah. Google naked. It should show up.
Make sure you're on the work computer too.
Yeah. Make sure. Just see.
That's how.
You guys would Google it.
Beautiful.
In my opinion, that's how all math should be taught, with real world examples and not in theory. But
definitely didn't want to see any of my math professors naked. So
no. Guys, I appreciate you guys jumping on with us. This has been great. We'll definitely need to do it again. Follow up.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank y'all for coming on.
Really enjoyed it. Cam, always good to catch up. And Jordan, enjoy your trip to India.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, where can people find you guys if they're interested in reaching out?
Find us on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Yeah, Jordan's on LinkedIn. And then shippingintel.com is our project name.
And Jordan does a lot of technical document write-ups on Medium as well.
Nice.
We're both. There's a lot of good technical stuff on Medium. Jordan and I kind of nerd on there.
So I do want to give a quick shout out to AMET University in Chennai, India. I'm heading there Saturday on a Fulbright grant, and I'll be teaching maritime informatics for about 3 weeks there in August.
That's awesome.
So I just want to give a shout out to the university in India. It's a very big maritime school, one of the top schools in the world, and they're very much into data science and training their maritime cadets and maritime operators on data science concepts. So,
I expect everyone in India to follow our LinkedIn page.
And listen to this podcast.
Yeah. What is it? 1.5 billion?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast on that note. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it.